The pen was still warm from his hand when I took it. 32 years of marriage, and my husband had just slid me a document across our dining table, a transfer of deed, selling our house to a family friend. The friend was sitting right there, legs crossed, lipstick smudged from the coffee I'd poured her. She didn't even pretend anymore. Her name was typed in bold, across the top, new owner, my name forged perfectly at the bottom. I looked at the paper, then at him, leaning back like a man who had already won, and her, smiling, the way predators do when they smell blood in the water. I could hear the old grandfather clock in the hall, tick, 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 as if counting down to the moment they expected me to surrender everything I'd built. I smiled instead. "You forgot one thing," I said, sliding the paper back toward them. Oh, her voice was honey with a knife under it. "You're not the only one who can fake a signature." Her smile faltered. My husband's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the room went so still I could hear my own heart beating not with fear, but with the slow, careful rhythm of someone who's already planned the next move. They didn't know I'd been waiting for this. They didn't know the deed they'd been drooling over wasn't the real one, and they definitely didn't know whose name would actually be on the title by the time this was over. It didn't start with the paper. It started with the way he began locking his phone. 32 years of shared passwords, shared bills, shared life suddenly. He had a passcode I wasn't allowed to know. The late nights at the office, the sudden gym membership, the cologne he'd stopped wearing for me years ago but was suddenly spritzing before meetings. At first, I told myself not to be paranoid. We'd been through worse financial scares, illness, the death of his mother that almost split us apart, but then came the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts, the lipstick marks on his collar that were just a little too neat to be accidental, and then her. She appeared like a shadow that thought it was sunlight, always in the background, always just close enough to touch his arm when she laughed. He introduced her as a consultant helping with property investments. I introduced myself as his wife, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. From that day, I watched. I didn't cry. I didn't confront. I waited. Because if there's one thing 32 years of marriage teaches you, it's how to read the battlefield before you move a single piece. I learned her name. I learned her address. I learned that her credit was a mess, her rent overdue, her last 2 relationships ended with restraining orders, and I learned she had a taste for men who owned more than they loved. So when I saw the way she looked at my house, the house my parents left me, the house whose walls I'd painted with my own hands, I knew exactly what she wanted. And when the day came that my husband slid that paper across the table, I already had my counterattack inked, notarized, and hidden in plain sight. Fear doesn't always come screaming. Sometimes it seeps in like a slow leak, quiet, relentless, until one day you realize the floor beneath you is rotting away. 3 nights after the deed incident, I woke to the sound of hushed voices in the kitchen. It was 2:13 a.m. The house was dark except for the yellow glow of the under-cabinet lights. From the hallway, I could see their shadows moving against the wall, his tall, slouched frame and her sharp silhouette, head tilted like a cat deciding how to kill a bird. "She's not going to fight it," my husband said, his voice low but steady. "She doesn't have the money for a lawyer, and she's too proud to ask her family." The scrape of her nail against my wine glass sent a jolt up my spine. "She'll sign," she replied, "one way or another." The or another wasn't loud, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that makes you want to check the locks twice before sleeping. I stayed in the hallway until I heard the front door close behind her. He didn't notice my absence when he came back to bed, but I lay there, eyes open, watching the cracks in the ceiling, feeling 32 years of shared life pressed down not from love, but from the sheer gravity of everything I'd ignored. By morning, there was an envelope waiting on the kitchen counter. It wasn't handwritten like the notes we used to leave each other. This was thick, cream-colored paper, embossed with a law firm's crest I didn't recognize. The letter inside was crisp, scrawled, "We represent parties interested in acquiring your property at fair market value." No names, just interested parties, but I recognized the last name of the paralegal who'd signed it. It matched hers. I read it twice before noticing the fine print a deadline. 7 days. That afternoon, my husband came home early. He didn't ask about my day. He asked where I kept the house insurance documents. Said he was just reviewing our coverage. I told him they were in the safe deposit box at the bank. He didn't like that answer. The next day, I received a voicemail from our bank manager. Someone had inquired about refinancing options on the property. My name wasn't mentioned in the request, but the file number matched my mortgage account. Fear crawled higher in my chest. It wasn't paranoia anymore. They were building a net around me, one thread at a time. That night, I walked through each room, fingertips grazing the familiar textures, the worn banister, the cool marble countertop, the paint chips in the door frame from when we'd moved in. I imagined her here rearranging my furniture, replacing my curtains, walking barefoot across the floors I'd cleaned for decades. It made my stomach turn. I knew I had to move. But one thing 32 years of marriage teaches you is patience. Patience to read the battlefield before you take the first shot. They thought I was cornered. What they didn't know was that I'd already spoken to someone, a lawyer, who owed me more than a favor, who had a copy of the real deed locked away in a safe they could never touch. Still, I could feel the clock ticking, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they stopped knocking and simply kicked the door in. Fear doesn't last forever. It curdles into something heavier rage, so dense it sinks to the bottom of your chest and drags your breath down with it. By the end of that week, I wasn't lying awake because I was scared. I was lying awake because I was planning. The shift happened the morning I found her lipstick on my coffee mug. Not just any mug, the one my mother had given me when I moved into this house. Hand-painted ceramic, chipped on the rim, worth nothing to anyone but me. It was sitting in the sink, a perfect half-moon of deep red pressed against the white glaze. She had been in my kitchen, drinking from what was mine, as if she already owned it. I rinsed it under scalding water until the lipstick smear dissolved, but the heat didn't leave my hands. It crawled up my arms, into my neck, behind my eyes. I couldn't unsee it, her mouth on what was mine, her laugh echoing in my hallway, her scent in my husband's clothes. She wasn't stealing quietly anymore. She was leaving her fingerprints on my life like a calling card. That evening, he came home smelling faintly of her perfume, not the cheap sweetness she wore in the early days, but something richer, darker, the kind you buy when you think you've arrived. He tossed his jacket on the sofa, pulled off his watch, and looked at me the way a man looks at a stubborn door he's decided to break down. "Did you think about the offer?" he asked. "I did," I said, "and I think you should tell her she's not getting this house." He laughed a short, dismissive bark. "You're tired. Let me handle this." Handle? Like I was a loose hinge or a squeaky floorboard. Like the 32 years I poured into this place were something that could be pried up with a crowbar and handed to her. That night, I didn't cry. I poured myself a drink I didn't need, sat at the kitchen table, and opened a spiral notebook. I started a list, not groceries, not chores, but ammunition, the real deed locked in my lawyer's safe, untouchable. Property tax records, every payment drawn from my personal account. Renovation receipts, the kitchen remodel, paid entirely from my inheritance. Witnesses, the neighbor across the street, who'd seen her car here at all hours. Photos, the ones I'd quietly started taking on my phone, her hand on his arm, her purse tossed on my chair, her shoes by my front door. The more I wrote, the calmer I became. Each item was a brick in the wall I was building between them and my home. They thought I was cornered. What they didn't know was that I'd already started digging the moat. The next day, I went to the attic and pulled down an old cedar chest. Inside were things I hadn't touched in years: wedding photos, love letters, the cufflinks I'd given him on our 20th anniversary. One cufflink was missing. I knew exactly where it was under the dining table, where it had rolled during their midnight whispering session. I left it there on purpose, like a marker at a crime scene. By the time I closed the notebook, my fear was gone. What replaced it was cold, deliberate resolve. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to erase me from my own life. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I'm ready, I told him, for what he asked, for whatever it takes to make them regret ever stepping foot in my kitchen. I didn't wait for his answer. Regret wasn't the end game. It was just the first course. The first move wasn't mine. It never is in a good game. If you want someone to fall into a trap, you let them think they built it themselves. They came to me just before dinner on a Tuesday. No phone call, no warning, just the sound of the front door opening and the click of expensive heels on my hardwood floor. He wore the navy blazer I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary, the one I'd picked because he said it made him feel untouchable. She wore a deep Predatory red, the kind that's meant to own the room before she even speaks. We thought it'd be best to talk face to face, he said, taking the head of the table without asking. I stayed standing. She followed, setting a leather folder on the table like it was a gift. I could see her manicured nails resting on the cover, claiming it. Inside, there were new documents, shorter, simpler, but I knew enough to see the poison in them. Partial transfer of ownership, she explained, her voice sticky with fake warmth. You'll still live here, of course. We just share. I didn't answer right away. Silence is a weapon if you know how to hold it. He leaned forward, mistaking my quiet for hesitation. This way. You're still secure. We just make the property work for all of us. For all of us. Meaning for her, meaning for them. I smiled slowly, like I'd been convinced. That sounds generous, I said, and watched her pupils dilate just enough to tell me she thought she'd won. I slid the folder toward me. Let me think on it, I added, already planning what I'd do with every line of those papers. They didn't know I wasn't taking them to review. I was taking them to dissect. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I need a decoy. I said, something that looks like a signed transfer, but puts the property into my own shell company. If they file it, they give me more control. If they sign it, they admit to knowing the terms. 2 days later, I had exactly that. Cream paper, official seals, my signature neatly forged by my own instruction, a document that could survive casual scrutiny but fall apart under legal light, taking their reputations down with it. I left it in plain sight on my desk, top page slightly askew, like I'd been interrupted mid-review. Then I forgot to lock the study before heading out for groceries. When I came back, the folder was gone. They didn't even try to be subtle. That night, I heard him in the den, murmuring into his phone, giving her the good news. Her laugh carried down the hallway sharp, giddy, ugly. The next morning, an automated email from the county clerk's office landed in my inbox, property transfer submission, rejected for incomplete party information. Exactly as designed. Now I knew 2 things. They'd bite without hesitation, and they'd bite hard enough to break their own teeth if I gave them the chance. I didn't stop there. I called my bank and set a fraud alert on every account tied to the property. I had the utility bills rerouted to a separate P.O. box, one they didn't know existed, and I instructed my lawyer to prepare a quiet title action just in case they tried something bigger. By the time the week ended, I'd built a cage they couldn't see, but every move they made would tighten it. They still thought they were circling me. They didn't realize I'd already drawn the circle around them. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind of day where the air is too still, like it's holding its breath. I was in the garden, pruning the roses, when a black sedan rolled slowly into the driveway. 2 men stepped out, dark suits, clipboards, not a smile between them. One adjusted his tie, the other checked a page in his folder before speaking. "Ma'am, we're here to conduct the preliminary property inspection," he said. I blinked. "For what pending transfer of ownership?" he replied, without even looking up. It felt like someone had tipped the ground under my feet. They had filed something that had made it past the county clerk. I let them in, because refusing would have looked like I had something to hide. Each step they took was like a nail being driven in. They tapped on walls, scribbled notes about the square footage, even opened cabinets without asking. In the living room, one of them paused to glance around. "Beautiful place," he said. "Shame you're letting it go." I said nothing. My jaw was locked so tight it ached. When they finally left, I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the impressions their shoes had left in the carpet. The house felt violated, like it knew what was coming. That evening, I went upstairs to find his cufflinks on the dresser again, both this time resting neatly on top of a thick envelope. Her handwriting on the front was a slap in the face. Inside was a single page. "This is happening. Save yourself the trouble and sign." Beneath it, a photocopy of what looked like the real deed, my name already struck through in thick black ink. I called my lawyer immediately. No answer. Voicemail. I left a message, my voice trembling. "Call me back. They've done something." The silence was worse than any answer. The next morning, I walked to the front door and froze. The key didn't fit. I tried again, and again. Then the door opened, and he was there, my husband of 32 years, leaning casually on the frame, as if this was all a misunderstanding. "You can still stay here," he said, smiling just enough to make it cruel. "If you sign. Otherwise, we'll make it official. Official." As if everything I'd built could be reduced to paperwork they'd already half-forged. As if my history here could be erased with a few notarized lies. I didn't answer. I just stepped back. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of her standing in my kitchen, barefoot, sipping from a glass of wine I'd bought last Christmas. She tilted her head, smirking, like she'd already redecorated the place in her mind. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. I parked 2 blocks away, engine off, watching the light in my bedroom flicker on and off. I stayed until after midnight, long enough to see the 2 of them walk past the window, his hand on her back, her laugh spilling into my night. In the trunk, I had 1 small suitcase, 2 changes of clothes, my toiletries, and the cedar box with my parents' wedding rings. That was it. Everything else was locked behind those new brass deadbolts. The cold seeped into my bones, but I didn't start the engine. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, replaying 32 years of dinners, arguments, reconciliations, shared secrets, and wondering how much of it had been true. For the first time, I felt the edge of defeat cut deep. Maybe they'd win. Maybe the house would be hers before the month was out. Maybe I'd be left with nothing but a suitcase and the bitter knowledge that I'd been outplayed. By dawn, I'd stopped crying. By dawn, I'd decided something else if I was going to lose. It wouldn't be in silence. If they wanted a war, they'd have to see what it looked like when I fought without caring what I had left to lose. They thought I'd gone quiet because I was beaten. They didn't know quiet is where I sharpened the knives. By Friday morning, I walked into Arthur Kane's law office with my head high. Arthur had been my silent shadow for months, keeping receipts, setting up structures my husband and his mistress didn't even know existed. On the table was a neat stack of folders. "They've taken every bite you offered," he said. I sat down and opened the first folder. Inside copies of every document they'd touched, the fraudulent deed transfer, the bogus partial ownership agreement, the inspection orders they'd slipped through the county office, all stamped with a detail. They'd overlooked a wrong middle initial here, a swapped parcel number there, dates that didn't match, small, almost invisible. Except in court, those errors became undeniable proof of attempted property fraud. Serve them, I told Arthur. By noon, a process server stood on my porch. My husband answered the door. The mistress hovered just behind him, wrapped in one of my old cardigans like it already belonged to her. The man handed them the envelope. I wasn't there, but my neighbor across the street later told me the mistress went pale, and my husband's jaw tightened until the muscle twitched. That was the first twist. They thought they were days away from owning my home. Instead, they'd been summoned to court where every forged signature and every false claim would be paraded under oath. But the second twist, that one was for me alone. Months ago, while they were still circling like vultures, I'd transferred the house into a trust under a corporate entity in another state. I was the sole trustee. On paper, I no longer owned the property. They couldn't touch me directly. And because they'd filed fraudulent paperwork against me personally, they'd been attacking someone who, in the eyes of the law, no longer held the title. The case would collapse before it began, even if they win something in court, Arthur said. They win nothing, I smiled. They're going to fight. Let them. The harder they swing, the more they hurt themselves. I wasn't done. That same day, I exercised my rights as trustee and issued a notice to vacate. 30 days. No negotiation, no loopholes. I didn't send it through a lawyer. I had it delivered by a courier hand to hand. When they opened the door, I was waiting at the curb in my car. They read the notice right there. "You can't do this," she snapped, voice high and thin. "I already have," I said, rolling the window down just enough for her to hear. "This house was mine before you ever learned my name. Now it's not even mine. It belongs to a trust that doesn't know you exist. And in 30 days, you'll be gone from it forever." My husband tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. "You've already said enough in forged ink." Her face flushed crimson. His eyes darted anywhere but mine. I didn't drive off immediately. I let them stand there, the paper shaking in her hand, the reality settling in. They'd wanted to take everything. Now they were counting down the days until they had nothing. As I turned the corner, I caught a glimpse of my front porch in the rearview mirror. For the first time in months, it looked like mine again. 30 days later, the house was silent again, my kind of silence, not the heavy, suffocating quiet of waiting for the next knock on the door. This was the kind of quiet that let you hear your own breath, steady and unbroken. They didn't leave with dignity. 2 days before the deadline, I saw them dragging boxes to the curb, snapping at each other under their breath. The mistress wouldn't meet my eyes when I passed by on my way to the mailbox. He tried to glare, but it came out hollow, like a man who'd already read the ending to his own story. On moving day, there was no goodbye, just the groan of the truck suspension and the sharp slam of the front door. I stood at the upstairs window until the taillights vanished. Then I walked the house, room by room, step by slow step. The kitchen smelled of lemon oil, not perfume. The counters were clear, no strange wine glasses or papers I didn't put there. In the bedroom, my quilt lay smooth across the bed, sunlight pooling over the fabric. In the study, I sat at the same desk where they'd once stolen my fake deed. Now, the top drawer held only my pen, my notepad, and the real documents Arthur had filed, locked, notarized, untouchable. The trust was in place, my signature, clean and undisputed, sat at the bottom of every page. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about proving something to myself, that after 32 years of marriage, after being betrayed in my own kitchen, I could stand my ground, that the woman they thought was too old, too tired, too dependent, was still capable of dismantling their plan piece by piece. I poured tea into the mug my mother had given me, the one she'd once used to tell me, "Don't let anyone walk through your life like it's their hallway." On the porch, the garden was blooming again. Some flowers had been bruised in the fight, but the roots were strong. So was I. A week later, my neighbor mentioned seeing him alone at the grocery store. No mistress, just a man holding a six-pack, looking like someone who'd misplaced his life and couldn't find the receipt. I didn't smile at the news, but I didn't feel sorry either. Some losses are lessons you earn the hard way. That night, I slept with the windows open. The wind moved through the house like it belonged here again. And in the dark, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't just protecting my home. Maybe I was reclaiming myself. What would you have done if you were her? Leave a comment. Your story could be the one that helps someone else wake up. Subscribe Grandma's Journal for more true story thrillers like this, where the quiet ones fight back and secrets never stay buried.